Chocolate spreads look harmless. Toast, swipe, bite, done. But most of them are built around sugar and oil first, chocolate second. In this video, we're breaking down 10 chocolate spreads you'll find across the UK that look rich on the shelf and fall flat on the knife. Subscribe if you shop with your brain. Number 10, Marks & Spencer Smooth Hazelnut Chocolate Spread. This is the quietest kind of disappointment because you expect something more refined. The jar looks polished and grown up, like it should deliver a richer experience than the standard supermarket option, and then it lands flat. The chocolate comes through first, but it's sweeter than it is cocoa rich with no real roasted depth. The hazelnut is present, but it stays in the background instead of leading. The texture is smooth but slightly heavy rather than silky, and the finish leaves a sugary coating instead of a clean, nutty aftertaste. The ingredient hierarchy tells you what's driving the flavour. Sweetness first, nuts second. In the Which UK taste test, it landed in the bottom group at 72%. So you're not getting deeper chocolate or stronger hazelnut, you're getting branding attached to an underperforming spread. Number 9, JimJams Hazelnut Chocolate Spread. JimJams is the classic I want the treat, but healthier move. It sells itself on reduced sugar, so you expect it to taste close enough to a normal chocolate spread, just a little lighter. The trade-off shows up straight away. The flavour feels thinner and less cocoa forward. The sweetness ends up doing more of the work than the chocolate. The hazelnut note is weak, and there's a noticeable sweetener aftertaste that lingers longer than the nut or cocoa. When a spread uses sugar substitutes like maltitol to cut the headline sugar number, that shift often changes both texture and finish. It's smooth, but it doesn't have that rich, creamy body that makes a spoonful feel satisfying. You keep eating, but you don't quite feel like you got what you came for. If you genuinely need a lower sugar option, you might accept the compromise. But if you want a normal chocolate hazelnut spread that still tastes like a treat, this is one of the jars that leaves people unsatisfied and back in the aisle looking for something else. Number 8, Bonne Maman Hazelnut Chocolate Spread. This is the one that will upset people because Bonne Maman is genuinely beloved. It has that red checkered lid halo. It feels traditional and reassuring, like it should be closer to something homemade than factory-made. That expectation matters. When a jar carries that kind of identity, you assume richer flavour and better balance. You expect the hazelnut to lead, not sit quietly in the background. In blind tasting, though, it didn't outperform cheaper supermarket jars. That's the key issue. Not whether it's awful, but whether it justifies the premium positioning when testers aren't ranking it above lower-priced alternatives. And when you check the ingredient order, sugar still sits ahead of hazelnuts. So despite the artisanal image, the structure isn't dramatically different from more ordinary spreads. If you like it, fair enough. But on flavour alone, the reputation carries more weight than the jar does. Number 7, Morrisons Hazelnut and Chocolate Spread. You're in Morrisons. You want something for toast or pancakes. You don't want to overthink it. The jar looks normal. The label says hazelnut and chocolate. That should be enough. But the flavour is weak. It leans heavily on sweetness, with only a light chocolate note and very little hazelnut presence. There's no real cocoa depth to anchor it, and the nut flavour never really takes control. The structure explains why sweetness dominates. Hazelnut isn't leading here. The texture is smooth but not rich, and it leaves a sweet film instead of a clean, nutty finish. It spreads easily, it isn't offensive, but it doesn't feel like a treat. This is the kind of jar that's technically fine, yet forgettable, and that's not what you want from something built purely for enjoyment. Number 6, Aldi Nutoka Hazelnut Chocolate Spread. Aldi's Nutoka matters because it breaks the myth that all supermarket-owned brands are identical to the big brands. Aldi has some genuinely strong products, and people love the idea that you can beat premium pricing with smart shopping. But in the Which UK taste testing, Nutoka scored the lowest of all products tested at just 62%. finishing last overall. Testers noted weak flavour intensity and poor balance. The chocolate lacks depth, the hazelnut struggles to come through, and the texture doesn't quite have the smooth cohesion you expect from a strong performer. Chocolate spreads are purely sensory. If the flavour doesn't pop and the texture doesn't feel right, the experience falls flat. And this one never quite delivers that satisfying, richness. Number 5, Poulain chocolate spread. Poulain sounds like it should deliver something more traditional. The name carries that old school chocolate identity, and the jar leans into French confectionery heritage. You expect depth from a brand with that legacy, but the flavour doesn't really build. It leans heavily on sugar, with chocolate coming through in a flatter, less rounded way. There isn't much hazelnut presence to add structure, so the profile feels one-dimensional rather than layered. The texture spreads easily but feels slightly greasy without the glossy, melt-in-the-mouth finish stronger spreads manage. When you look at the ingredient balance, sugar and vegetable fat sit ahead of meaningful nut content. That usually tells you how the flavour will land. Sweetness first, complexity second. It's not inedible. It's underwhelming, and in a category built around indulgence, that's hard to justify, especially at £4 to £5 for 400 grams in the UK. Notice the pattern. Most jars aren't failing because they're awful. They're failing because they're built around sweetness first. And number 4, Jardin Bio Étic chocolate spread. Organic labels are powerful. They make people feel like they're choosing quality, and spreads are one of the easiest places to get tricked by it. Jardin Bio Étic also scored 10 out of 20 in the same panel, landing among the least satisfying options in blind comparisons. Organic sugar and organic fats are still sugar and fats. They change the label, not the basic structure of the product. In the panel, it did not deliver a superior taste or mouthfeel to justify itself, so you end up paying for the idea of organic without getting a better chocolate hazelnut experience. Number 3, Sainsbury's Hazelnut Chocolate Spread. This is the jar many people buy for the same reason they grab supermarket pasta sauce. It feels safe. You're already in Sainsbury's. You want a chocolate hazelnut spread, and this one looks like it will do the job without much thought. The issue is that safe doesn't mean good value. In comparative testing, it sits mid-pack rather than near the top, and when stronger performing jars are available at similar prices, that matters. On the first bite, it tastes fine because sweetness always shows up, but once you compare it side by side with better spreads, you notice what's missing. The chocolate lacks depth, the hazelnut doesn't lead, and the overall balance feels slightly muted. It works, but it doesn't stand out. At typical own brand pricing for a 400-gram jar, this should be an easy value win. Instead, it lands in that frustrating middle ground. Not bad enough to avoid, but not good enough to justify choosing it over something better. Number 2, Bio Village Spread. Bio Village is positioned as a budget-friendly option, and it tastes like one. The aim seems to be acceptable rather than memorable. The flavour leans heavily on sweetness, with only a faint chocolate note and minimal hazelnut presence. There's little depth or roasted character, so the profile feels flat rather than layered. When you check the ingredient order, sugar leads ahead of nuts, and the structure relies more on vegetable fats than meaningful hazelnut content. That combination usually produces exactly this result: smooth enough to spread but lacking richness. If you want to spend less, that's fair. But in a category built around indulgence, spending less and getting noticeably less flavour isn't really a win. Number 1, Ovomaltine chocolate spread. This takes the worst spot because it promises character and delivers sugar. Ovomaltine is a brand associated with malted chocolate identity, so you expect something distinctive, you expect depth, cocoa presence, and real hazelnut structure supporting that malt note. Instead, sweetness dominates from the first bite. The chocolate feels shallow, the hazelnut struggles to register, and the overall profile leans more sugary than layered. Look at the ingredient hierarchy and it makes sense. Sugar and vegetable oils sit prominently, while hazelnut content plays a secondary role. The formula relies heavily on structure and flavouring rather than nut depth to create impact, and it spreads smoothly, but smooth isn't the same as satisfying. In a category built entirely on richness and balance, this one puts sweetness first and complexity second. It takes the bottom spot. Now that we've covered the spreads to skip, let's look at 2 strong alternatives available across UK supermarkets. These deliver on flavour, balance, and that satisfying treat feel without the letdowns. Waitrose Essential Hazelnut Chocolate Spread. This is what accessible premium should look like. The branding is understated, the positioning is confident, and you expect something a step above standard own brand spreads. On the spoon, it delivers. Cocoa has real presence, hazelnut builds rather than disappearing, and the sweetness supports instead of leading. The texture is thick and glossy without feeling greasy, spreading cleanly without tearing bread. The ingredient balance reflects that structure. Sugar doesn't overwhelm the nut content, and while palm oil is present, the overall result feels controlled rather than flat. In which UK testing, it scored 82%, placing it among the stronger performers for flavour, sweetness balance and consistency. At around £2.50 for 400 grams, it stands out as one of the better value to flavour options on the shelf. Gü hazelnut and chocolate velvety spread. Gü brings its dessert reputation into this jar, and the difference shows. With 35% hazelnuts and no palm oil, the ingredient structure already sets it apart from standard supermarket spreads. On the spoon, hazelnut leads clearly. There's real roasted depth, supported by proper chocolate presence rather than masked by sugar. The balance feels intentional. The texture matches the name, thick, glossy, and genuinely velvety. It spreads smoothly without tearing bread and melts cleanly on warm toast, leaving a nut-forward finish instead of a sugary film. At around £2.50 for 200 grams, it's priced like a treat, but it delivers the depth and balance that justify it. Drop the one you'll never buy again in the comments, and if you shop with your brain, not the label, subscribe. Part 2 ranks the best in the UK.